Okay, it's time to work on our posture. Hey, quick note. I know I got these weird things on my head. Just got some stuff burned off. Everything is all fine. Wear your sunscreen, people. So, in our last lab, we set up our environment to run the open source version of Prowler from our security audit account. And we configured it to use an external ID to prevent the confused deputy attack when it assumes our cross account role to run scans in our other accounts. Now it's time to learn a little bit more about cloud security posture management. It's Big Brother CNAP. I'll explain what that is in a minute, and why these tools are so important that they're one of the first things I install when I set up a new non-lab AWS organization. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of hate the name Cloud Security Posture Management. Like, who cares if my cloud is slouching in its chair? But I have to admit it makes sense. We can't call these cloud vulnerability scanners because what they're finding aren't necessarily vulnerabilities. They're just things that are configured in a way that maybe in the right context could be useful to an attacker. These aren't really vulnerabilities in the traditional sense because they are allowed configurations that have a good use. Just there are ones that might be problematic in the right circumstances. Like we need public S3 buckets, but a public S3 bucket might also be bad if we didn't want that particular bucket to be public. When I first started in cloud, we had to figure all this out ourselves by hand, and I quickly moved from doing everything in the console to building my own tools, and they were a little ugly. Then I found Prowler, and that's what we installed last week, and I swapped over. Tony, who maintains Prowler, kept it up to date with great coverage, and it was really efficient. And it was actually originally a very complicated bash script that used the Amazon command line interface. Now, obviously, everybody had this problem, and thus vendors were born, including mine, although we had a bit of a different focus. We'll talk about that later. Over time, these tools consolidated to a core feature set, and eventually Gartner caught up and branded the category CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management. Now, at their simplest, modern CSPM tools will connect to a cloud account and read the configuration of the services. Then they will identify misconfigurations based on their own list. Usually that involves using public standards as well. They're going to rate the misconfiguration severity and they're going to generate reports. Practically speaking, modern tools have a lot of additional features. They will run centrally or as a SaaS platform and can assess large multi-account and multi-cloud deployments. So you can use the one tool to look at AWS, Azure, Google. They store all their configuration information in their own internal database. So that gives you, the customer, a full inventory of everything that's running in your cloud, all of the different services and how everything is configured. The modern tools include extensive security and compliance database to assess against multiple standards. And they might offer more complex analysis, such as identifying IAM misconfigurations that could lead to a privilege escalation, but only under certain circumstances. The modern tools will support visualizations of relationships, such as showing, what security groups and IAM roles are associated with an instance. And this is often integrated into something called a security graph I'll get to in a second. They offer alerting and complex reporting, and it's really the scale and the deep multi-cloud support that sets these tools apart from the earlier tools, the original bash scripts or the really horrific Ruby code that I wrote. But there's also more that they can do. You might find real-time inventory and assessments. So instead of being time-based, some of the more advanced tools will run in real time, where other ones might only update daily. They can correlate the configurations with the activity in CloudTrail and other logs, so you can actually figure out who created and how that misconfigure was created. Or those security graphs I mentioned, they can get really advanced and actually look at potential attack sequences. Like if this security group is open, there's this instance behind it with this IAM role that has access to these data repositories, it can actually track that whole sequence, and there's a whole lot more that they can do. Well, CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management, this is the foundation of managing our cloud configuration security or posture. God, I hate having to use that word, but it works. It's like the right word to use. They are essential for managing security and compliance, and every major cloud service provider has one built in, but none of them give it away for free. Yeah, I mean, you would think that they would include like a critical essential security capability into your subscription, but nope. On the other hand, there's plenty of third party tools, and historically, they've done a better job than the ones from the cloud providers. While CSPM focuses solely on the core security posture of your cloud environment, there was another tool that started developing in parallel called Cloud Workload Protection Platform, CWPP, and blame Gartner, not me. So these are actually vulnerability scanners, and they look for vulnerabilities in instances, containers, and even serverless functions. I know you're thinking to yourself, wait, didn't we already have vulnerability scanners for operating systems and stuff? Well, yeah, we did, and they sucked for cloud. Those vendors were too fat and happy, and they asked us to do painful things like open up security groups for a network vulnerability scan or install agents in containers that were meant to run on multi-processor operating systems in Big Iron. So these things didn't really work very well. And so we saw the rise of these CWPP, these cloud workload protection platforms that use cool tricks like instead of scanning your live running instances, they'd take a snapshot of it and then scan that snapshot, or they would scan the container images. So they didn't really have to mess around with running things, and they're really optimized for running in these environments with lighter weight agents and all these cool capabilities. Well, as you might imagine, workload protection platforms started showing up in CSPM tools, or the CSPM guys bought them, or the workload guys bought the CSPM tools, or all of the above. And then vendors started adding or buying up other features. So scanning infrastructure as code, establishing APIs, performing cloud detection response, focusing more on identities with something called Cloud Identity and Entitlement Management, or KIM, not SIM, but KIM, because SIM is SIEM and security information. And yeah, it's just crazy. And we can't help ourselves with these names. I mean, please make it stop. Well, in the end, somebody just threw it all together, and we call that Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, or CNAPP. It started as cloud security posture management and workload protection combined. Now it just includes whatever the vendor can buy or copy from somebody else. Or maybe, sometimes they build it themselves. Look, this isn't a criticism. It's just a reality that when you see CNAPP as CNAPP, it will always include those CSPM core capabilities that we are exploring in the next few labs, as well as workload protection. And it might have a lot of other features, and you may or may not want to use those, and you may have something better depending on who you are or what you're doing. But these are those overall cloud security platforms. And yeah, I don't know why we didn't just call them cloud security platforms, but maybe that's why I don't work at Gartner anymore. All right, so why did I subject you to this painful history lesson? Look, my goal with Cloud's Law, it's to provide you deep practical knowledge to work as a cloud security professional. And even though this lab is a year into the program, these CSPM CNAPP tools, those are going to be one of the first things you're going to touch if you get a cloud security job. It's important to know what they are and how they work and the differences in those categories. This is just really practical cloud practitioner knowledge. And so that's why we're running through this series, and you're going to get hands-on with different types of these tools and in different scenarios. Today, we're just going to use our very basic deployment of Prowler, and that was the first open source CSPM available long before anybody put those four words together. Prowler does also have a commercial version that can do a lot more, but we're going to stick with just the basic CSPM and just the basic open source version. Now, last week you scanned your local account really quickly with Prowler, and this week we're going to use our cross account role that we set up last week to scan our workload one account after we create some misconfigurations in there so we get some interesting results. And then you're going to have the chance to change some settings and see some different results. You could even scan all of your accounts, although I will warn you, I'm going to give you some hints if you want to do that. I don't do that myself because that's probably going to break because we used a small instance and it just doesn't have the horsepower to run on that particular scale. We'll get to that in a minute. This lab, it's just the level one, simple cross account, a non-paralyzed scan. It's non-automated. It's something I still might do if I'm performing a hand assessment, but mostly I'm going to use a SaaS platform, or I would automate Prowler to run at a wider scale. However, before we can get there, we got to walk, or we got to crawl, walk, run? I don't know, something like that. All right, let's get into the lab. This lab's going to be kind of fun. We're going to set up some misconfigurations using a CloudFormation template. Now, as always, I set this up to be very cost effective, so I kept things pretty simple. You'll see there's an instance in there that isn't running. Then we're going to go back into our security audit account and we will run Prowler. So we're going to learn how to use it from the command line. We did that last week and we looked at some results from our local account. This time we're going to look and there's some specific misconfigurations I've put in place. And I'm not going to tell you what all of those are. You're going to see one of them, but that's going to be the challenge for you to kind of figure that piece out. One of the things that you're going to learn as well with CSPM tools, they have tons and tons of findings. We're going to look very briefly at kind of how to filter, how to prioritize. And that's one of the reasons that I kept this lab until so late in our education. It's because that I wanted to make sure you had that base fundamental knowledge to know what you're looking at. A lot of places I go into, they buy one of these tools, one of the big commercial platforms, they install it, they get all of the results, and they don't actually learn, the people that are operating that tool, the ins and outs of the cloud platforms themselves that they are working with. And I think that's the only way you can really have a good idea of what's going on. With that, let's jump in. And as I go through, there's going to be a bunch of little educational points mixed in on this one. To start off, let's go to our sign-in portal, and we need to deploy that CloudFormation template. So we'll go into a test account 1 and administrator access. From there, we go to CloudFormation, create stack with new resources, and paste in the S3 URL from the blog post. It will say lab 66. This is more than the 66 lab, but some of them I called other things like stage checks. We'll click next. The name for this is, let's call it misconfigurations. Did I spell that correct? I did. This is one of our simpler stacks. There's not a whole lot going on. We still need to click that little blue box, click next, scroll down, submit. And do I want feedback for the CloudFormation create stack? I do not want to provide feedback right now. And we'll let this one run. I'm going to go ahead and pause. Now, we could just jump out of this screen, but I want to make sure that it doesn't run with any errors. That's why I'm going to pause and wait. And it worked. So mine is all finished. I can close this window. Now we'll go into security audit, and that's where we have Prowler running. And we'll go in with our administrator access. And if you recall, we shut Prowler down last week at the end of our lab. So we'll go to EC2. We'll go to instances. And you'll notice there's nothing running because it says instance state is running and Prowler is not running. Close that out and it will appear. So click on the Prowler. It says stopped. Go to instance state. Start. And I'm going to wait about 3 minutes because I want it to start, but I also need it to connect to the systems manager, session manager, and that can take an extra couple of minutes. So I'm going to go pause again. Let's see if that's enough minutes. I'll know. So let me hit refresh here. And the status checks are still initializing, but it is running. I'll know. I'll click connect. And good. So I would get an error if it wasn't ready. We'll connect in with Session Manager. Once I'm in with Session Manager, the first thing I need to do is get into our EC2 user. So sudo or sudo, super user do, su -ec2 user. That's just Linux for log me in as the EC2 user. And I have to escalate my privileges to do that. And that's done. Now, if I look at the directory, I can see the scripts. So these are scripts that I created and dropped in the directory for you to go ahead and perform scans. Quick scan is what we used last week. Scan account is what we're going to use this week. And if you want to, you can use scan all org, and I will talk about that a little bit later. But with that quick scan, I need to go grab a command line because there's one error in that script, or it's not really an error. I'll explain in one moment. Let me get the line I need to copy paste. Okay, let me paste that in. And before I hit enter, I'm going to explain what this does. So when I was testing this lab, the instance we're using is so small that the Prowler scans were not running to completion. And that was kind of a problem. Obviously, we don't have a really good lab if you can't actually finish it. However, it's just because this instance doesn't have a lot of resources, very little memory, and it just kind of was running into a wall. The answer is this command, that this SED. So what this is going to do, it's going to find and then replace. It's going to actually insert a line within our configuration file, this scan account file. Not configuration file, but it's basically a bash script. And I'll show it in a moment. And it's going to say, only scan these three services, IM, S3, and EC2. Spoilers, that's where I created misconfigurations. So we don't have to worry about any of the other services. So this is just going to do more than enough for us. So when I hit enter here, that went ahead and that changed the line. Now I want to show you that line because it is important for you to know what we're actually doing. So cat just is going to display it, scan account.sh, hopefully no typos. Yay, got it on the first shot. And so this is a regular bash script. So it's saying bash, scan cross account, and upload to S3. So what I did is I just pre-built some of the Prowler command line stuff in here. Now the first thing is this is making sure that we assume the role that we need to do the work that we're going to do because we're working cross account. And if you recall, to do the assume role, we have to have that external ID. We're not using the IAM role of the instance. That has no permissions to do anything in the other accounts. We actually have to do this assume role operation. Now that IAM role has permission to assume the role, but we're going to be using that role in that remote local account over here. So the way we do it is we're saying Prowler, AWS, because we're doing an AWS scan, only scan these services, use the role that we defined up here. So that's part of all of that code. Then the external ID, and that external ID comes from our user data field. Remember, we set that up last week. Then it's defining what output formats, and then it's telling us where to output it, which is an S3 bucket with a particular naming convention that we use that we created last week when we were building this environment. So that's all that is. It's basically assume the role, use the external ID, and save the files to that particular S3 directory. All right, so let's go ahead and run that. And to do that, we go bash scan-account.sh, and then we need the account ID. Oh no, I didn't get it. Really easy. We just go back to our tab here, go down to test account 1. There's my account ID. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it here, and it runs the scan. I'm going to keep it monitored before I pause. So Prowler just fired up. You can see it's going to give us a little bit of information about the color coding that it uses for its results. And again, this is the simplest way. Well, the simplest way is just run it in the same account, but this is just about the simplest way to run Prowler. You see it's already finding stuff, passing and failing. And so as it's running, I'm going to go ahead and pause my screen because it gets kind of boring. But that's the important part about this. We made sure that we're running Prowler, we're going cross account. Our instance has a role that allows it to assume the target role that we created with our stack set in all of those other accounts last week. So it's now running Prowler from one account, scanning into another account, and then saving those results into an S3 bucket. And it is using that external ID we set up. So even though, look, everything's running in our account, I'm not really worried about confused deputy, but it's a good habit to get into, and it's going to be very important as you use external tools. With that said, I'm going to go pause it, and we'll come back as soon as my scan is done, which I think is not actually going to be that much longer. Not only was it not that much longer, like as I hit my pause button, the scan finished. So because we're only scanning those three services and we don't have much in that account, everything is nice and safe. Now, if we go back to our screen here, you'll see that you can download the report using that command line. Now, that's only if you have permissions, and we are not actually set up on our local computers to have permissions. However, we can go to AWS console and browse to this URL. So I'm going to right-click that. Oh, nope, it's saving it as an image. Let's see what happens actually if I click on it. Oh, it worked perfectly. It opens it up in a new tab. It's opening it up in the console, And there you go. This is the exact directory that I wanted with my scan results. The ones I'm going to look at are those HTML results. Now, I don't think this will work. Let me give it a shot. So if I hit the object URL, yeah, so it's going to give me access denied because I'm not set up for HTML to do that directly in the browser window. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to download it, and I'm going to open up that downloaded file with my browser. So download, it's saved locally, and then let me pause for a sec to open that up. And all I did is I went to my local system, and I dragged the file, and I dropped it into the browser, and it opened up. So these are the Prowler results. And let's see how many results we have. Well, if I scroll down, even for one tiny account without much, I've got 3 pages of results. There's a lot going on. Now think about it. We only scanned 3 services. There's a ton of results here, a lot to sift through. These tools can be very, very noisy when you start using them because they haven't been tuned to your needs, your environment yet. Let's do a little bit of that. I'm going to point you in some directions, and I'm going to give you some opportunities to go either remediate or make some of these things a little bit worse. Going back to the screen here, let's start with filter. So first of all, I don't care about pass. So let's only look for the fail results. And this is just running as a local HTML file. This is not like a full SaaS platform connected to the web server in the back end. You get a lot more capabilities if you do that. It's just this works well for our lab. And let's say I want to ignore medium, but I will look at critical. Can I select 2 at once? High and medium. So I'm now filtering down my results, but oh man, that is still a lot of results that I'm going to see there. And all of the services, all of the regions, these are all the individual checks that you can turn on or off. And if I click here, now you'll notice all the green ones are gone. It's only all of the red ones. So all of the mediums or highers that it found, but it's all in one page. And let's look at a couple of these just to give you a sense. So for example, we have here a Launch Wizard security group. That actually is a decent fail, and I would rate that one as a medium. Normally, that's the kind of thing that I would want to clean up. You may or may not have all of the same results. Remember, my environment can be slightly different than yours. They should be very, very close, but this tells you why that's a problem and what you should be doing instead of using these launch wizards. And that's something that I've talked about previously in labs way, way back a while ago. The other thing here is you can actually see the compliance standards, so the frameworks and stuff that recommend for or against that. Here's one, critical, S3 bucket. S3 bucket open to the internet, and that might be something you want to go ahead and look at. So bucket ACL, and that one is completely public. I don't even remember when I created that one. I'll be completely honest. In one of our previous labs, again, I know that there's not actually a security issue. There's nothing in there, but it could be a problem. Here's another one. And again, another public bucket. So these are critical. And I'm going to go look at these in just a moment. But there's a lot of results here, and some of them you're not going to really care about. Oh, here's port 22 open from the internet. Yeah, so that is definitely a problem and something you might want to look into. So what security group is this? Security group, CloudSlaw, SSH, open to world, has port 22 open to the internet. But there's a really interesting aspect of this. This, if you look, is its interface type is not allowed. That's going to be different. There's just a lot of stuff to look at in here. Let me pause for one sec to find something. Here we go. Ensure no network ACLs allow ingress from 000 to point 22. That network ACL allows it. Here's the deal. I don't care about network ACLs. I never use network ACLs. You'll notice that we didn't even do a lab on them. Most places I go, we don't use those network ACLs. So this is showing up as a medium level vulnerability for something that I don't even recommend you ever touch. They're always there. You can't get rid of them, But if I have my security group set right, I don't need those network ACLs. And I certainly don't need to double up my network ACLs and my security groups. There are some use cases for them, but not a ton. And this is the issue with CSPM tools, is that they can find a lot of things that you might not care about or might not matter in your environment. And look, I built a CSPM platform. I got it acquired by somebody. Like this is, I do believe in these tools, but they can be a lot of work, and that's why we waited now, so you had an understanding of what's going on. Okay, I'm going to leave you to look at all of your results here. And yeah, you can see network ACL, every port open to the internet, and these are coming up as mediums. I just don't care. But what I want you to do is see if you can identify the 3 flaws, maybe 4, depending on how you do your math, that I created in this environment. And we're going to keep those up and running. Now your instance is not up and running. We're going to keep those things up and running so that you can come back to them later, because we're going to learn how to use some other tools as well. So these are the results in the scan, and in that same directory, you can also find your, you could get it as a CSV file and sort it as a spreadsheet. You don't have to use the web interface. It's just what we used here. And then going back to Systems Manager, you actually get the summary here. Now, a couple of things. If you want to use that scan all of your accounts, I strongly recommend that you add that services line. So let me show you what that looks like. So scan-all-org.sh. And you'll notice that this iterates through every account in your environment by making API calls to AWS organizations. But let me find the line. So this doesn't have that services line that we added in. You're going to want to add that services line in there. Otherwise, it's just going to pause. But it would take much longer to run that. It will save all of those results. If you go into your S3 buckets, your Prowler reports, go into scans, it actually organizes your scans by account ID. This was last week's. This was this week's. And the other thing you can do is go make some changes in the environment. Again, these labs are, you can do what you want with them. But for example, run the instance that's in that environment that's shut down right now, and then see if you get different results from when you are doing your scan with that instance in a shutdown state. All right. I hope you enjoy this. And as a reminder, these CSPM tools, they are really essential, really critical. It's how I gain visibility into the environments. It's one of the first things that I use when I set up an organization, but we still have some other ones to explore. We're going to look at a commercial platform. Don't worry, it'll be for free. And we're also going to look at Amazon's Security Hub, which they recently updated since the last time we looked at it, depending on how long ago you did those other labs. That's it. Have a great week.